Let's start with a film specifically pitched to what we're doing here. 2019's A Field Guide to Evil, which consists of 8 short, actually disconcertingly short, folk horror films from 8 countries. Like most anthology films, it's pretty uneven, but still worth a watch. Austria is represented by the co-directors of the unsettling psychological thriller Good Night, Mommy. They are Veronica Franz and Severin Fiala. Their short, The Sinful Woman of Hofal, while it's set in a remote medieval village, beautifully shot, the subject matter of an ongoing lesbian affair feels a little overtly contemporary, so it wasn't my favorite. But not so with the embodiment of guilt or sin that visits the heroine by night, squatting on her chest, like the thing that Austrians call a Trut, or we would call a nightmare or night hag. Then from Turkish director Kan Evrenal, we get a film about Alkarisi, the childbirth demon. Its contemporary setting breaks the spell a bit, I think, but the claustrophobia of a mother's postpartum depression, along with the grim consequences of a minor theft she commits, are all nicely unsettling. And from Poland, we get a story of a spirit promising a soldier victory if he eats the hearts of 3 corpses. It's much more predictable than the director Agnieszka Szmoczynska's earlier feature, Lure, which was a horror musical comedy about man-eating mermaids performing in a Warsaw cabaret. Not really folk horror, but worth checking out. And our American entry, Beware the Melonheads, is actually a fairly insipid treatment of a Midwestern legend, also found in Connecticut, of wood-dwelling humanoids with oversized, gourd-like heads. And there's an Indian tale shot in gritty black and white, which has a man scouring ruined temples of that country for human oddities to populate American sideshows. It's not quite as good as it sounds. And oddly, the German director Katrin Gebe's short A Nocturnal Breath also treats the night-visiting Trut or Druda like the Austrian segment does. This one in a bit different aspect, however, visualizing the creature as a rat entering the sleeper's mouth. There's also an evocation of the plague. I think it's good. I may be biased toward German folklore with my Krampus thing, but I thought it was one of the more successful bits. The worst was, I think, the Greek entry. I don't even want to talk about it, really, but it did contribute that striking image of the woody, tree-headed creature that makes the film's trailer a lot more intriguing. The best, I would say, was I guess it counts as the Hungarian entry, even though it's from an English director, Peter Strickland, who lives or lived in Hungary at the time. He made the horror films Burbian Sound Studio, which, well, not exactly folk horror, seems to be a favorite of a lot of folk horror types. It's probably partly because it evokes the 70s, as do actually his other films, In Fabric and The Duke of Burgundy, not a horror film. Anyway, his short, The Cobbler's Lot, was done in an expressionist, not sort of 1920s style, Guy Madden's work, and has the same sort of occasionally cruel sense of comedy to it, too. It's about a lethal love triangle. Oh, that was kind of a lot on one film. I'll go a little faster on the others. Hello again. Another much better film, also a collection of separate stories, is the Italian-led but internationally produced production from 2015, Tale of Tales, based on the collection of folk tales by the 17th century courtier Giambattista Basile, which is called the Pentamerone, and subtitled in Neapolitan, that is, Tale of Tales. Long before the Brothers Grimm or even Charles Perrault began collecting folk tales, Basile's collection had already set out the earliest versions of Rapunzel and Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella. It's 3 different, more obscure stories this film explores, and does so with very lavish visuals and also sort of brutal and comic sense of the tragic and the grotesque. It's a darker film. The first story has a king and queen, unable to conceive, visited by a necromancer who suggests a course of action. The king must slay a sea dragon, hack out its heart, and have it cooked and served to the queen. And while this does work, there's a kink. Two sons are actually conceived, and the queen develops a murderous hatred toward the other twin and pursues him to the story's conclusion, which involves a giant humanoid bat, which is quite nicely realized, as is the sea monster dispatched by the king, who is played by John C. Reilly, of all people. It's an international cast. The second story is probably the best match for our folk horror genre, as it's entitled The Flayed Old Lady. It involves a king seduced by beautiful singing he hears outside the home of two very elderly sisters. He eventually demands to meet the singer in person, and this is resolved with the help of a witch. Jealousy develops between the sisters and leads to a grisly resolution, which is, of course, the flaying, which I count as one of the most grotesquely amusing scenes I have ever witnessed on screen. And the final story, The Flea, involves a specimen of this insect grown to the size of a Volkswagen, pretty much. It also involves an ogre and plenty of bloodshed and decapitation. And there's also a wedding, which brings in all the characters from the other stories as a sort of wraparound bit.
So those are our international entries. I'm going to be proceeding from here, country by country, or at least language by language, for those countries which embrace the folk horror genre. So we'll be moving on to Spanish language horror, which is always a booming industry. Because the folk horror genre was born in the early 70s, and even contemporary efforts sort of reflect that era, I'm going to start with the film that actually jump-started Spain's taste for horror, and that is 1972's Tombs of the Blind Dead.
The blind dead, in this case, are Templar knights said to reside around ruins of the fictional medieval Spanish town of Berzano. Blind, we're told, because their eyes were pecked out after they were hanged on charges of witchcraft and heresy. You can think of them as zombies, but the director, Armando de Osorio, considered them living mummies, actually, rather more intelligent than zombies, and they do feed on blood, vampirically, not on brains. In any case, the mummies are nicely realized and particularly creepy on horseback with their cloaks flowing. I'm counting it as folk horror because it shares certain tropes, the role played by the professorial expert consulting ancient tomes and the theatrically witchy rites performed by the revenants. The film not only spawned 3 sequels, which came out over the following 3 years, but was recut and retitled in America Revenge from Planet Ape, presumably because in their decayed form, simian-human distinction became a bit less noticeable, and of course because Planet of the Apes films were big at the time. If we hop over to Mexico, we'll find plenty of horror films, though the majority seem to borrow characters and themes from American productions and aren't all that folkloric. But as for indigenous material, there are a few versions of the La Llorona myth, which was embraced recently as an American franchise. Unfortunately, I don't have these streaming with subtitles, so I'll be skipping those. But if we go back to 1960, there's a lovely folkloric film, Macario, a sort of fable set in colonial days and telling the story of Macario, a destitute peasant who longs only to enjoy a rare feast, a turkey his wife has prepared for him on the Day of the Dead. Before he can do so, however, he's visited by God, the devil, and death. To stave off his earthly troubles, he offers the bird to Death, who then rewards him with a bottle of miraculous water that can heal any ailment. It's a gift that makes him fabulously wealthy, but it also attracts the attention of the dreadful and always unexpected Spanish Inquisition. A director who happened to be influential on Guillermo del Toro, particularly in his preoccupation with imperiled children, was Carlos Enrique Taboada. This is his last and probably best film from 1984, Poison for the Fairies. It follows a witchcraft-obsessed 10-year-old girl, Fabiola, living on a crumbling country estate. who befriends an orphaned classmate and convinces her that the two of them are witches. After concocting a poison for the fairies, which in their mythology are the natural enemy of witches, their activities grow a bit darker. Then, if we return to Spain and jump ahead quite a few years, we have two more films set along the country's border with France in the land of the Basques, where, in the 17th century, Europe's most extensive witchcraft trials were held. The first, a horror comedy from 2013, was directed by Alex de la Iglesia, who had already directed another film in that genre in 1995, The Day of the Beast, about a priest who becomes convinced that only by becoming the world's greatest sinner can he avert the birth of the Antichrist. The film we're discussing, however, is in Spain called The Witches of Zugarramurdi, referring to an actual Basque town known for a cave prominently featured in the film in which witches' Sabbaths were said to be conducted. In English-speaking countries, however, you'll find this film rather unfortunately titled Witching and Bitching. The story follows the adventures of some Spanish bank robbers attempting to flee to France, who end up in the titular town, encountering a thriving and cannibalistic witch cult who would like their stolen gold for use in some momentous ceremony that will somehow initiate a new era of witchy ascendancy. Along with the spectacular footage shot within the historic cave, the film is amusing, and it also makes prominent use of an actual rhyme understood in Basque folklore as a witch's spell, one set to a melody used in 1969 by the Basque singer-songwriter Macario, which you can hear here. By the way, there is also a field outside the cave, which was also reputed to be the site of witches' Sabbaths. It went by the name Acalare, meaning in Basque, the field of witches' Sabbaths. It went by the name Acalare, meaning in Basque, the field of the goat, the black goat worshipped, of course. And it's actually come to be used just to mean Black Sabbath, or witches' Sabbath in Spanish. And it also happens to be the name of an interesting film about the subject that's just been announced this month, so I don't have much information about it, but I think you can tell what it's about. The second film, which actually features a fair amount of dialogue in the Basque language, along with Spanish, is based on one of the tales collected by the priest and preeminent ethnographer of Basque folklore, Jose Maria Barandiaran. The film from 2017 is Errementari, the Blacksmith and the Devil. Errementari just meaning blacksmith in Basque. The smith in question is feared by the village for supposedly murdering his wife, and he lives in a fortified compound, which is broached one day by an orphan girl who discovers within a boy in a cage. She releases him, only to see him assume his true form, a devil, which is wonderfully and very traditionally realized in CG as a creature that could come straight from a medieval manuscript. The smith, it turns out, has sold his soul to the imprisoned demon for reasons quite different from those of a cruel murderer, and in the exchange he was cheated, which leads the smith to torture the devil in very folktale appropriate ways, namely ringing bells blessed in a church and scattering chickpeas, which the demon must compulsively count. After a few further plot twists and revelations, the Smith is confronted by colonial authorities and a village mob, which gives him the opportunity to show off his smithing skills, crafting all manner of traps and weapons and brutally appealing suit of armor.
We're going to look at Germany now, which of course had an early start with horror in the silent days, beginning in 1915 with the adaptation of The Golem. The silent films Nosferatu and Faust also have folk horror aspects, but they were based on literary reworkings of folkloric material, so we'll skip ahead. So if you are a fan of folk horror, you know that the Vincent Price film Witchfinder General from 1968
is regarded as the first of a trio that defined the genre, and the others being, of course, The Blood on Satan's Claw and The Wicker Man. Well, Germany had a parallel film to Witchfinder General, 1970's Mark of the Devil. I won't go into the plot as it's what you would expect, but with more gore and more nudity. The original German title makes it all rather clear, translating as Witches Tortured Till They Bleed. And while the film was confiscated by censors in the UK, it was promoted for its excesses in the US, using the slogan Rated V for violence and gimmicky sick bags available in the theater lobby. It's also noteworthy for its international cast, which included Udo Kier, who appeared in Warhol's Frankenstein and Dracula films, along with Lars von Trier's excellent Swedish series, The Kingdom. There's Herbert Lom, who was the Phantom of the Opera in a dull 1960s remake. And it also features German actor Regi Nadler, who played the Nosferatu-like figure in the American series, Salem's Lot. The 1989 film Laurin is a coming-of-age kind of fairy tale with plenty of Gothic trappings. It's set in a small port town at the end of the 19th century where a black-clad stranger appears, becoming the object of Laurin's fearful obsession and nightmares that spill into her waking life. There's an evil presence hanging over a ruined castle, hallucinatory encounters with an ever-present black dog, voices crying out from behind closed doors, and a figure that stalks about the town with a sack in his hand. And then the children start disappearing. It's not a film that will make you jump in your seat, but it's a highly atmospheric and underappreciated little film. Our next German language film comes from 2010 from Switzerland, and I think the only Swiss-produced horror film. It has the odd title, Sennentuntschi, which is the name for a female effigy made of sticks and cloth and straw and odds and ends, something that those tending the flocks would supposedly create to give themselves a little comfort in their solitude out there on the Alpine slopes. And yes, I do mean that kind of comfort. The traditional folktales aren't so explicit about that, but they do mention the shepherds propping the figure up to supposedly eat and drink and join them in card games. And once the liquor's flowing, they decide to hold an irreverent baptism of the doll, which is the devil's cue to step in and bring the thing to life. Well, the baptism is absent from the film, but all the rest is played out, along with drunken and possibly hallucinatory scenes of the doll coming to life. It's really quite an enjoyable film that merges this folkloric element with a crime thriller that involves some shocking deaths and the appearance of a mysterious female stranger in the town. Another German-language film with an Alpine setting is 2018's Hagazusa, which is an old High German word for witch, related to our word hag. It's been compared to Robert Eggers' The Witch, and likewise portrays witchcraft as a response to Grimm's social forces, with a bit of room left open for the supernatural. The narrative is rather loose, following a female goat herd, Albrun, who, like her mother, lives as an outsider harassed by those in the nearby village. Her harassers appear early on, terrorizing the women by night, dressed in animal skins and horns. Traditional contemporary Krampus suits, actually, to those of us in the know. A little cameo by the Krampus. There follows a series of vignettes portraying Albrun's interactions with the villagers, veiled threats, betrayals, violence that all mingle with grotesque and fantastic elements. Bodies marked by the plague and swarming with snakes, chapel lined with skulls, voices from the woods, and moving shadows on the cabin walls. Albrun lashes out by poisoning the community's well, eventually ingests mushrooms, and in a visionary state commits a truly horrific crime. It moves more slowly than The Witch, but there's a building sense of doom in every one of those lingering shots. It's all underscored by magnificent, eerily droning score.
We're going to go to Scandinavia now with a very strange and beautiful film from Iceland from 1952, The White Reindeer.
The reindeer in question is actually a shape-shifting vampiric entity, a form assumed by a lonely bride after she visits a shaman to ensure her husband's interest in her while he's away for long periods tending his herd of reindeer. The stories and characters belong to the nomadic Sami people known throughout medieval Europe for their shamanistic magic. And at the Cannes Film Festival, it won a special award for Best Fairy Tale Film, the same year that Disney actually released Peter Pan. Oh, Peter Pan. And from Iceland, we have a 1990 film, The Juniper Tree, very loosely based on the story of that name, collected by the Brothers Grimm, one of the most horrific in their collection. While the film omits the tale's surreal decapitation, it does retain other horror elements, including cannibalism and maternal ghosts, albeit friendly ones in this case. And it adds to all this an element of witchcraft. The Juniper Tree stars Björk as Margret, one of the two sisters whose mother has been burned as a witch. Fleeing the family reputation, they encounter a widower in another village over whom Margaret's sister, Katla, casts a spell of seduction. The widower's son, however, does not really trust this new stepmother, and tragedy results. This one's an exception in our collection as it was shot in English, albeit heavily accented in a way that rather enhances the old worldly feel of things. And Björk, as always, is magnetic. And the black and white photography makes the most of that stark Icelandic landscape and captures the brutal realities of medieval life in a way that recalls Bergman films, The Seventh Seal and The Virgin Spring. Two fun films from Scandinavia that drew large audiences in 2010 were both horror comedies, Troll Hunter from Norway and Rare Exports from Finland. I'm sure many of you know these, but I did want to quickly comment on the folklore. Troll Hunter gets good grades for representing the trolls' association with mountains and bridges, their ability to smell the blood of Christians, and their reaction to sunlight, which is turning to stone. Rare Exports goes out quite a bit further on its limb with its story of the Finnish gift-bringer Joulupukki, or Yule-Buck, though he's stripped of any historic goatish elements, and he's actually shown more as a feral version of our Santa Claus, a sort of globalized figure. The setting, which is Korvantundari Mountain, is traditional, but only recently so, as it first appeared in the 1930s Finnish radio play. Then we have the 2012 Norwegian film, Tale, which gives us a specimen of a holder, or huldra, a tailed female forest dweller of Scandinavian folklore. This one's discovered in an abandoned, hidden laboratory by a pair of ne'er-do-wells hired to do a crime scene cleanup. I wasn't particularly enamored of their presumably comedic relationship, or impressed by the substandard CG, which is used to represent some of the satyr-like creatures, which may or may not have been intended as males of the species and don't look like anything from Scandinavian folklore, which regards the huldra as a strictly female being. So bad marks there. In the film, the huldra is a prisoner of a scientist and the subject of a presumably cruel experimental process intended to humanize her. And what's interesting is the 2018 Swedish film, Border, a much more intriguing and nuanced film, not exactly belonging to the horror genre, or perhaps any genre, actually. It presents the same notion, with its lead characters represented as surviving members of the ancient race of trolls who spent their childhoods hidden in institutions and also were subject to surgery removing their tails. Thing about Scandinavians and cutting troll tails off somehow.
Now we'll jump down to the Czech and Slovak republics, an area particularly rich in folk horror. We'll begin with the 1970 film, which takes its name from the 15th century witch hunter's manual, the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of the Witches, which is the film's title in Czech. And it became Witch Hammer for its release in English-speaking regions. The horrors it depicts aren't really of the supernatural kind, but more those based on actual events. The North Moravian witch trials, which took place between 1622 and 1696. Witchhammer focuses on two historic characters in the process: the Inquisitor Boblig von Edelstadt, a power-hungry believer in the methods laid out in the Malleus Maleficarum, and a Father Christoph Lautner, who starts the ball rolling when he reports a communion wafer stolen from his church for use in witchcraft. As Boblig's investigations grow more ruthless, the priest raises objections that soon see him also targeted in the Inquisition. And the whole thing unfolds with a sort of grim fatalism that's often taken as an allegorical attack upon the communist show trials of the era. Our next film, also from 1970, is better known, but still needs to be mentioned for anyone who has yet to see it: Valerie and Her Week of Wonders. It's based on a book of the same name by Vyacheslav Nezva, an associate of the Parisian Surrealists and founder of the Surrealist group in Czechoslovakia. The film is a dreamlike tale of the titular character on the verge of womanhood in a medieval village visited by a group of missionaries and a troupe of traveling performers at the same time. And among these is Grazian, a priest of a ghastly white complexion who appears to be a vampire, as is the case, it turns out, with the girl's own grandmother. Grazian, like nearly everyone in the story, harbors erotic designs on the girl, which she fights off with the aid of a pair of magic earrings, which are involved in much of the plot. There's also an attempt at witch birdie, plans to steal Valerie's heart from her chest, and other threats which somehow resolve or dissolve into scenes of otherworldly mysticism by the film's end. The score for the film was particularly good and actually inspired a Philadelphia band to come together in 2007 as the Valerie Project to perform original music to accompany the film. The soundtrack of Valerie happens to have been composed by the same artist who contributed the haunting music accompanying our next film, one of several we'll discuss, by the director Juraj Herz. In 1972, Herz gave us Morgiana. It's a fable of two sisters bound by jealousy over the inheritance of a crumbling hunting lodge, which happens to be haunted by the ghost of a ballerina. It's a spectacle of turn-of-the-century hats and veils worn by the sisters who spend inordinate time gazing into mirrors which seem to offer magical revelations, Snow White style. The jealousy eventually leads to the brewing of poisons and a murder, or a possible murder, depending on how far the sisters' tenuous grip on reality has strayed. And all of this scheming is observed by an ominous and very prominent Siamese cat. Oddly, it's Hertz's take on Beauty and the Beast in 1978 that's actually more squarely in the horror camp. It's something that feels like a Hammer film if Hammer had actually been ambitious and well-funded enough to attempt the visionary. And part of this is the design of the beast, which reads as a sort of decomposing two-legged griffin without wings. And there's also the dwarf-like monsters hiding in the shadows and dangling from chandeliers in his castle, which itself is a crumbling ruin filled with tangles of dead trees and grotesque serpentine roots. While the story is mostly the traditional one, there is a further element of horror, other than the design choices, as the beast here is a bit more beastly, constantly tormented by whispering voices urging him to murder Beauty and to drink her blood.
One last film by Juraj Herz that I have to mention, even though it really lacks any folkloric element. It's certainly rich in horror. His 1969 breakout film, The Cremator, which explores the psychological collapse of a crematorium director as he slides into collaboration with the Nazis. It's not so much a horror film as a black comedy, very black, and shot in a provocative style that you won't forget. And a more recent film from 2000 to close out our Czech and Slovak survey. It's called Kytice, which translates to bouquet or garland flowers. It's in 7 segments from 7 of the poems included in Karel Erben's 1853 collection of folk tales and ballads by that name. Its heavy-handed stylistics can sometimes come off as a gauzy-lensed perfume commercial, but there are some nice horror elements, an embodiment of death, the murder over a golden spinning wheel, and the standout segment involving a dead soldier resurrected by his lover's prayers to the Virgin, but not in a good way. There's also the poem of the Noonday Witch, represented as a towering, shuffling hag who appears to whisk away a child who cries too loudly. This figure, who appears in Slavic and German folklore, and it's also called the Lady Midday or the Noon Wraith, appears at the stroke of noon, sometimes as a whirling dust cloud, and particularly to field workers in whom she causes heat stroke. The Noonday Witch was also the title of a 2016 Czech film loosely based on the poem, one that offers a remote country house and a deteriorating mother-daughter relationship as psychological fuel for the apparition. I should also mention the 2000 film Little Otik, a dark comedy featuring the always delightful stop motion of director Jan Švankmajer. It's based on the 1865 story The Wooden Baby, also by Karel Erben. Not really folk horror, but a wonderfully grotesque production about the husband of a childless couple who fashions an infant from a log, and one that grows up to enormous size and dangerously ravenous appetite.
We are on our way to Russia, but first I wanted to mention a couple of films from the old Soviet Republic or its satellite states. The first one is from 1961,
Mother Joan of the Angels, which, despite the angelic name, is related to the 1971 film The Devils by Ken Russell. Both explore a 17th century outbreak of alleged demon possession in a convent in the French town of Loudun. Mother Joan treats the latter part of the story after the parish priest has been implicated in the affair and executed. Father Joseph Surin, the exorcist sent to Loudun, struggles with the wily Joan, who at once embraces a demonic persona while craving a certain sort of redemption entangled with personal attraction. This confrontation inflames the priest's faith with a sort of madness that ends in a ghastly way. Far from Russell's overheated handling of the incident, this film offers a more severe take on things, underscored by stately black and white cinematography. From Estonia, we have a strange and beautiful film released in 2018, November. It's all set in a 19th century village where villagers interact with werewolves, the devil, and death. And it begins with the theft of a cow by a krat, a creature of Estonian folklore assembled from odds and ends and farm implements in this case, which is given life to act as a mechanical slave to its master. Krats play a significant role in the film, conversing with and even offering romantic counsel to the lead Hans, whose fateful pursuit of Lena, a girl promised by her father to someone else and who can also transform into a werewolf. There's also a sleepwalking baroness and a witch who attempts to aid the couple in their union.
Russia has some very interesting horror films from the last decades, but their early cinematic history seemed to be more interested in science fiction. This was during the space race of the 50s and 60s, of course.
There are, however, a large number of folklore films, not folk horror, but some marvelous productions from the 1940s through the 60s, directed by stop-motion specialist Alexander Pushka, sometimes called the Soviet Walt Disney. The other master of fairy tale film during that period is Alexandra Roux, whom we'll look at since the witch Baba Yaga is featured in his films. We're seeing clips from one of his earliest pictures from 1939, Vasilisa the Beautiful. This was his more serious period in which the folk tales are presented as much for adults as children. The witch appears in several of his films and is played for laughs later, always portrayed by the male actor Georgi Miliar, who also played the titular evil sorcerer in Roux's 1944 film, Cachet the Immortal. There's an excellent 1967 film, the first Soviet-era horror film based upon a novella by Nikolai Gogol. It's called V. Like other work of his we'll discuss shortly, it draws upon Ukrainian superstitions to depict the struggle between a seminary student by the name of Koma and a host of evil spirits, most dreadful of which is the giant creature called V, or the V, which is a figure strictly of Gogol's creation as far as I know. Koma's troubles begin when he and a group of traveling students ask to spend a night at a farmhouse where an old woman, who turns out to be a witch, comes to him by night, tries to seduce him, and then ends up riding him like a broom over the countryside, and also ends up getting killed when he decides to resist. Things get worse when Koma is compelled by a wealthy merchant to keep vigil, praying over the corpse of his daughter for 3 nights. Supernatural manifestations occur around the corpse, escalating over the 3 required nights into an all-out war with the forces of evil. As with Gogol's story, there's a certain loose humor to the film, some of it unintentional perhaps, given the special effects, which are at times clunky and sometimes good, and the whole thing adds up to a charmingly spooky spectacle. In 2014, the film was remade into a 3D computer graphics extravaganza that became Russia's highest-grossing movie of the year. Its title in English-speaking countries is V, The Forbidden Empire. Oddly, they inserted an English cartographer tasked with mapping the uncharted lands where the story is set. It's him whom we follow to the village that lives in fear of the cursed church perched high upon a crag above, where the climactic vigil plays out, of course. Everything from Gogol's unassuming story or the 1967 film is dialed up to 11 in this way in the film, and the whole feels much more like a product of Hollywood than a Ukrainian folktale told with a bit of a nod and a wink. Not that it isn't gorgeous to look at. Another work by Gogol, rich in folklore, has been adapted into a few productions. It's an 1831 collection of stories, also set in Ukraine, called Evenings on a Farm near Dikanka. This is the title of another film by Alexandra Roux, though his production only uses one of the stories, that is Christmas Eve, hence the somewhat confusing English language title, The Night Before Christmas. Released in 1961, it also features his Baba Yaga actor Georgi Miliar playing the devil. I won't go into more on that one as there's no real horror element to it, but other than the devil, I suppose, but it is a fun watch. Elements of Evenings on a Farm near Dikanka, along with V, are threaded throughout the Russian TV series Gogol, airing its first season in 2017. I haven't included television shows here, but each of the 3 seasons has been repackaged as streaming movies. Season 1, Gogol, just Gogol, or Gogol the Beginning. 2 was Gogol V, and 3, Gogol, A Terrible Vengeance. Gogol himself is a character in these, brazenly reimagined as a sort of supernatural sleuth, and despite the wacky premise sure to irritate any actual Gogol scholars, the show is quite entertaining and visually rich. A prominent Russian director in the horror genre lately is Svetoslav Poditsky, whose films fall within the genre we're considering for the most part. The first of these is 2017's The Bride, which begins with a prologue set in the 1800s involving a chemist who dabbles in the occult and photography. He's seen taking post-mortem photos of his wife, which is creepy enough, and apparently somehow this is related to a ritual we then observe in which the wife's soul will be transferred into that of a peasant girl who is buried alive. The story then jumps to the present and preparations for a wedding in which descendants of this researcher are to marry their daughter to a fiancé unaware of the wedding's connection to this resurrection ritual. The country home setting, coffins, and a resident ghost all contribute to what's probably Podjeski's best film. His earlier Queen of Spades, The Dark Rite, from 2015, involves a slumber party mirror game that invokes a malevolent spirit. Apparently our Bloody Mary is known as Queen of Spades in Russia. 2018 saw the release of his second best picture, I'd say, albeit one that makes plenty of use of standard genre gimmicks. It's called The Mermaid, Lake of the Dead. This subtitle hints at the fact that this is not really about mermaids as we think of them, but the Russian rusalka, a ghost usually dwelling in water and lacking the scaly tail. The less fishy guise makes it possible for this rusalka to seduce the male lead, who also happens to be engaged to be married. One kiss from her has a vampiric effect, draining his strength and causing his fiancée and best friend to rally in what plays out more like a ghost hunting or exorcism movie, actually. There's also a Baba Yaga film he finished in 2020, one set in the present, which removes any folkloric trappings and is actually just terrible. In 2017, another director, Sergei Gainsbourg, was behind the film Ghouls, also called Vamps, and in Russian, Vordalaki, a word adopted for vampire in the country thanks to its use in a short story, The Family of the Vordalak by Tolstoy. Though it claims to be adapted from that work, there's really little to justify that. It involves a vampire-fighting monk, a blood-drinking overlord ensconced in an appropriately spooky castle, and the film's love interest, who may or may not be sacrificed in a ritual that will empower vampires to walk in daylight. There's also plenty of CG bat swarms, a sacrificial goat sucked into the earth, and hordes of very ripped vampire warriors. No high aspirations here, just a CGI spook show to watch with popcorn.
To wrap up our survey, I'm going to go to Turkey for a couple of film franchises that I think you'll be interested in. These are just recent discoveries for me, so I'm particularly eager to share these.
The first is the Dabe series by Hasan Karajeda. There are 6 of them, 4 of which are currently available streaming with subtitles. They don't share characters or develop an ongoing story, and the name Dabe seems to be attached more for branding than anything else. Dabe is from an Arabic phrase in the Quran describing a mysterious entity called the Beast of the Earth, which will appear as a sign of the end times. It's only mentioned in the first film from 2006, which isn't available streaming, but this one's about an apocalyptic rash of suicides spread via email and other online activity, as the internet itself turns out to be identified as the Dabe prophesied in the Quran. And these emails in this film are spread by the jinn, who are living on the other side in the virtual world. But in his later films, they become a much more immediate presence. I won't detail the plot lines of the various movies, but most all involve hostile jinn or jinn possession, family curses, ghosts, inexplicable tragic accidents, and plenty of black magic are also involved. The construction of charms from inscriptions on parchment, along with a host of repulsive elements taken from sacrificed animals in the grave, is particularly nice and visceral the way it's visualized. As you can see, while the films have contemporary settings, there's often an ancient tome consulted, visits to holy men in extremely rural villages, sometimes populated by superstitious residents, and in other cases entirely abandoned because of a curse. And many of the stories claim to be based on true events. Karachada uses a lot of found footage and grainy, distorted video, a bit of 3D, and lots of barrages of split-second imagery, as you can see from all these. Along with the eerie sound design that makes the most of Islamic chants. It's all very effective, though there's certainly a low-budget feel to his productions, which aspire to nothing more, really, than creating an atmosphere of horror and delivering a few good shocks here and there. The third, fourth, fifth, and sixth films in the series are available streaming with subtitles. The other Turkish franchise I wanted to mention are the Sickle films. There are 6 of these to date, and all are available streaming with subtitles. Sickle refers to the book that contains the names of the damned, or it can refer to the bottommost pit of hell. In the first film, it becomes a sort of grimoire used by a magician consulted by the female protagonist on a matter of love. To horrible effect, of course. The films are all independent of each other again, and Sickle, as with Dabe, is used in the title of all of them for branding rather than any recurring plot element. These films, which benefited from the robust appetite generated by the Dabe films, make less use of found footage and visual gimmicks. They're not quite designed in the same way to deliver the shocks and shudders as the Dabe films, but they also don't have that low-budget feeling and are generally better scripted, with some of the stories reflecting the simplicity of folk tales, though they all have contemporary settings. Malevolent jinn and jinn possession, the curses, and so forth all play the same important role as in the Dabe films. Rather than trying to describe the various stories, I'll just let some footage from Sickle 1 through 6 close out my talk, and then I'll be back for some live Q&A with all of you.
ربي موتك نهارك. المسبان تركك.